Vietnam's jungle didn't just hide enemy soldiers. It was filled with some of the deadliest wildlife on the planet, creatures that killed and injured American soldiers throughout the war. This isn't about minor inconveniences. Military medical records show these animals caused real casualties. Some species were so dangerous that certain units lost more men to wildlife than to enemy action during specific periods.
If you're a veteran watching this, you already know these fears intimately. For everyone else, pay attention, because this is the side of war that rarely makes it into textbooks or movies.
Let's break down the most threatening creatures American soldiers faced, starting with the ones that don't get talked about enough. Indo-Chinese tigers still roamed Vietnam's jungles in the 1960s and 70s. These weren't small cats. Adult males could weigh over 400 pounds and measured up to 9 feet long. Multiple documented incidents involved tigers attacking American soldiers. Michael Herr's dispatches mentions rumors of tiger attacks that circulated among troops. But these weren't just rumors. Military incident reports confirm actual attacks occurred. The problem with tigers was their hunting behavior. They're ambush predators that attack from behind, going for the neck or throat. A soldier on guard duty at night or walking at the rear of a patrol made a perfect target. The attack would be silent, sudden, and often fatal before anyone realized what was happening. One particularly well-documented case from Marine records describes a listening post being attacked by a tiger at night. The Marines heard screaming, rushed to help, and found one man dead from massive trauma to the neck and head. Track marks confirmed it was a large cat. The unit spent the rest of the night fortifying their position against an enemy that didn't care about gunfire or grenades. Fire support bases near jungle areas had to account for tigers in their defensive planning. Perimeter guards weren't just watching for Viet Cong. They had to worry about 400-pound predators that could kill silently and drag away a full-grown man. The psychological impact was significant. Knowing a tiger might be stalking your position added another layer of fear to night operations. Some soldiers reported hearing tiger vocalizations near their positions, the deep, sawing roar that tigers make. That sound in the darkness, when you're already worried about enemy sappers, created a primal fear that's hard to describe. Wild boars in Vietnam weren't like farm pigs. They were aggressive, territorial animals that could weigh over 300 pounds with razor-sharp tusks capable of disemboweling a man. Soldiers moving through jungle would occasionally stumble onto boars or their territory. An angry boar would charge without warning. Those tusks could slash through a leg, rip open a stomach, or sever major blood vessels. Medical evacuations for boar attacks weren't common, but they happened enough to be documented in unit medical records. The real danger came during night operations. Boars are primarily nocturnal. A unit setting up an ambush position or a listening post in the dark might set up right in a boar's territory without knowing it. When the boar came through, soldiers had to make split-second decisions: shoot and give away their position, or stay quiet and hope the boar passed by. Several incidents involved boars charging into defensive perimeters at night, causing troops to open fire thinking it was a sapper attack. The resulting noise and chaos could compromise operational security and alert actual enemy forces to American positions. Robert Mason's Chicken Hawk briefly mentions a helicopter crew seeing a soldier being chased by a boar across a clearing. It reads almost comically until you realize that boar could have killed him if it caught up. The term rock apes referred to large primates in Vietnam's mountains and forests. Likely a combination of different species, including rhesus macaques and potentially undocumented larger primates. These weren't cute animals. They were territorial, traveled in groups, and could be extremely aggressive. Multiple unit reports describe being pelted with rocks and branches from apes in the canopy. While that might sound minor, a rock dropped from 50 feet up can cause serious head trauma. More concerning were reports of apes entering base camps and displaying aggressive behavior. They would raid food supplies, destroy equipment, and sometimes attack isolated soldiers. Their strength was considerable. Even medium-sized primates are several times stronger than humans pound for pound. Some reports from mountainous regions describe encounters with unusually large apes that soldiers couldn't identify. The Vietnam Archive at Texas Tech University contains multiple accounts of soldiers reporting ape-like creatures that seemed too large to be any known species. Whether these were misidentified known animals or something else entirely remains unclear. What's documented is that soldiers encountered aggressive primates that caused operational disruptions and occasional injuries. Estuary crocodiles, called alligators by most American soldiers, inhabited Vietnam's rivers and coastal waters. These are the largest living reptiles, capable of reaching over 20 feet in length and weighing more than a ton. For riverine forces operating on Vietnam's waterways, crocodiles were a constant concern. These animals are ambush predators that attack from the water's edge or from below the surface. A soldier at the water's edge, a boat crew member reaching into the water, anyone who fell overboard, all were potential prey. Several documented incidents involve crocodile attacks on American personnel. The Brown Water Navy's operational records include mentions of crocodile encounters that resulted in casualties or near misses. One incident involved a crocodile lunging at a patrol boat, nearly pulling a crew member into the water before others drove it off with gunfire. The murky water made it impossible to see crocodiles before they attacked. Soldiers who had to cross rivers or operate near water constantly worried about what might be lurking below the surface. Units conducting river crossing operations would sometimes fire into the water first, hoping to scare off any crocodiles in the area. Medical records show at least several confirmed crocodile attacks. The injuries were catastrophic. These animals have bite forces exceeding 3,000 pounds per square inch. Survivors of attacks often lost limbs or died from blood loss and trauma before they could be evacuated. Kraits deserve special attention among Vietnam's snakes because of their hunting behavior and venom potency. The banded krait and Malayan krait both inhabited Vietnam, and both were primarily nocturnal, meaning they were most active exactly when soldiers were conducting night operations. The venom is neurotoxic, among the most potent of any snake. It causes progressive paralysis, starting with the extremities and moving toward the respiratory system. Victims remain conscious while becoming increasingly paralyzed, unable to move or breathe. Without antivenom and respiratory support, death is nearly certain. Here's what made kraits particularly insidious. Their bites often weren't immediately painful. Soldiers could be bitten and not realize it until symptoms began appearing. By then, the venom had already spread through the system. Multiple medical case reports from Vietnam describe soldiers who were bitten during night operations and didn't report it until they began experiencing numbness and weakness hours later. Kraits would enter sleeping areas and defensive positions at night. Several documented cases involve soldiers being bitten while sleeping. Waking up to paralysis spreading through your body in a combat zone with limited medical support available, it's a nightmare scenario that happened multiple times throughout the war. The difficulty of treating krait bites in field conditions meant that many bites were fatal. Antivenom had to be administered quickly, and respiratory support was necessary as the paralysis progressed. Forward medical units often lacked the resources to treat serious krait envenomation, meaning evacuation was urgent, but not always possible in active combat zones. Vietnamese centipedes could exceed 12 inches in length. Some documented specimens reached 14 inches. These weren't just large, they were venomous and aggressive. The venom causes extreme pain. Multiple medics accounts describe the pain from centipede bites as comparable to or worse than many combat injuries. The affected area would swell dramatically, sometimes doubling in size. The pain could last for days, and infections from the bites were common. These centipedes would crawl into anything: boots, sleeping bags, clothing, packs, equipment. Soldiers learned to shake out everything before use. But centipedes were stealthy enough that they sometimes weren't detected until they bit. Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried briefly mentions the ritual of checking boots. a practice driven largely by the threat of centipedes and scorpions. Night operations meant encountering centipedes in the dark. Lying in ambush positions or setting up listening posts, soldiers would feel something crawling on them but couldn't use lights to identify what it was. When that something turned out to be a foot-long centipede and it bit, the resulting pain and swelling could compromise the mission. Medical evacuations for centipede bites were rare. Units couldn't spare helicopters for non-life-threatening injuries. Soldiers bit by centipedes usually had to continue their missions while dealing with excruciating pain and significant swelling. Some bites became infected, requiring eventual medical evacuation days later when the infection had become serious. Multiple species of large venomous spiders inhabited Vietnam's jungles. While most weren't deadly to healthy adults, their bites caused significant pain, swelling, and sometimes serious complications. The psychological impact might have been worse than the medical impact. Soldiers moving through dense vegetation would emerge covered in spiders, not just one or two, but dozens. Large spiders dropping onto soldiers from overhead vegetation was a common occurrence that never stopped being horrifying. Some species were aggressive and would bite when disturbed. The bites caused localized pain and swelling, but the real problem was the potential for infection. Spider bites in the jungle environment, where everything was contaminated, frequently became infected. These infections could turn serious, requiring antibiotics and sometimes evacuation. Finding spiders in sleeping areas, equipment, and clothing was so common that it barely rated mention in most accounts. But the constant presence of large spiders, some with leg spans of several inches, added to the general misery and stress of jungle operations. Now let's circle back to creatures mentioned in earlier videos, but with more depth on why they were such significant threats. As covered before, bamboo vipers and various cobra species created constant danger. But the scope of the snake threat deserves emphasis. Military medical records show snake bites occurred almost daily across American forces in Vietnam. Some units experienced multiple snake bites per week during certain periods. Philip Caputo's A Rumor of War contains detailed descriptions of soldiers' encounters with bamboo vipers. Harold Moore's We Were Soldiers Once and Young discusses medical challenges treating snake bites during the Ia Drang battle. These weren't isolated incidents. They were routine medical emergencies that diverted resources and endangered lives. The cumulative psychological toll of constant snake threats wore soldiers down. Every step, every hand placement, every movement through vegetation carried the possibility of a bite. This vigilance never stopped. After months of checking every branch and scanning every path, the mental exhaustion became as debilitating as physical exhaustion. We've mentioned leeches before, but their impact deserves fuller treatment. These parasites were absolutely everywhere in Vietnam's jungles and waterways. After any movement through wet areas, soldiers would be covered in them. The leeches themselves weren't deadly, but they created multiple problems. First, they carried diseases. Second, improperly removing them could leave the head embedded, causing infection. Third, the wounds they left were prone to infection in Vietnam's contaminated environment. But the psychological impact was severe. Having dozens of leeches attached to your body, feeling them moving under your clothing, finding them in places that shouldn't be mentioned, it created a constant sense of violation. Soldiers felt like the jungle was literally consuming them. Leech checks became regular rituals. Units would stop and examine each other, burning or salting off the leeches they found. Some soldiers developed serious infections from leech bites. A few cases of severe anemia from blood loss occurred in soldiers who were covered in leeches for extended periods during long-range patrols. Mosquitoes weren't just annoying. They were vectors for diseases that killed and incapacitated thousands of American soldiers. Malaria, dengue fever, and Japanese encephalitis, all transmitted through mosquito bites, caused more casualties than some combat operations. The military malaria statistics are staggering. Over 80,000 confirmed cases among U.S. forces. The actual number was almost certainly higher, since many cases went unreported or undiagnosed. Soldiers would be healthy one day and delirious with fever the next. Some died. Others were incapacitated for weeks. Dengue fever, breakbone fever, caused such intense joint and muscle pain that soldiers couldn't function. No prevention existed beyond avoiding mosquito bites, which was essentially impossible in Vietnam's environment. No cure existed either, just managing symptoms and hoping for survival. The anti-malarial medications had side effects severe enough that some soldiers stopped taking them. This decision sometimes proved fatal when they contracted malaria. The choice between medication side effects and potentially deadly disease was one more impossible calculation soldiers had to make. Vietnam's wildlife created a constant biological threat that compounded every other danger soldiers faced. The Viet Cong could be avoided with good tactics and alertness. Booby traps could sometimes be detected. But wildlife was everywhere, unpredictable, and indifferent to military strategy. These creatures weren't metaphorical threats. They appear in casualty reports, medical records, and unit after-action reports throughout the war. Tigers, crocodiles, venomous snakes, disease-carrying insects, each added to the burden American soldiers carried. Understanding these threats helps explain why Vietnam was so psychologically exhausting. Soldiers couldn't relax even in supposedly secure areas. The jungle itself was hostile. Every moment required vigilance against threats that ranged from microscopic parasites to 400-pound tigers.
If you found this valuable, please give a like and share it. Subscribe for more reality-based Vietnam War content. And check the description for sources. Everything discussed here is documented in military records, veteran memoirs, and historical archives. Thank you for watching.